This is Watanabe from Boston Consulting, and thank you very much for having interest in what I would be saying. And so this is just giving away what our news is, but we're a consulting firm, but we're also paying attention to what technologies would really impact the society. And we actually have a dedicated team whenever we find any technology. And by the way, last week we just submitted a report. The latest report came out, and today I just like to give some flavor of what we said there. And it does say towards the bottom, I'm actually one of the writers here. And at the moment, we are working hard so that we be able to offer the Japanese version soon. So those of you who want to read in Japanese, it's probably going to take time because, as it says here, it's supposed to take you 15 minutes to read. But today I'd like to use 20 minutes to just verbally tell you what's on this report. And so 3 years ago in 2021, I think we were sort of hasty in doing that back then, I guess, but BCG wanted to forecasted how the quantum computing market would flourish. And we were saying back then that by 2040, there is going to be 450 to 850 billion value, dollars worth, be created. And I'm just going to speak in terms of dollars because if I tried to translate that into yen today, it's pretty confusing, but I'm just going to speak in dollars. And in other words, we were saying there's quite a lot of potential here. And the background, as you can see, there are 4 use case that could be expected, or category, if I may. And there's probably going to be like 100 or more use case. And we also asked some experts in the business side if this sounds right. And we also asked them, when do you think these categories, use case, would start to materialize into something more feasible in the market? And so again, I mentioned 450 to 850 billion, and how's that going to be allocated? And so this was really just created from scratch. But there'll be a lot of service providers, and users, and we do believe that 15 to 20% would be the people who will be provided, and 80% of the value would be kept amongst the user. That's the usual case, and so that's why we've allocated like 80% of that 450 to 850 billion. And also back then, we were also talking about, again, when we looked into 2040, we thought that there probably would be 3 phases time-wise. First phase would be about the NISQ phase. And far right, that's the full-scale fault-tolerant FTQC timing. And we expect that was going to be 2040. At least that's what we thought back in 2021. And there's also the middle part. There's this in between the NISQ and full-scale fault tolerance. That's the broad quantum advantage stage. And so we sort of looked at the 3 phases. And more recently, like 3 years ago, that's what we thought. But developments really accelerated after that 3 years. And so how do we expect for this to be in the world today? And we're also trying to sort of give some recommendation of how people in the business side are supposed to look at this now. And there are 2 areas that we believe is going to really drive. In other words, we thought it's going to be value and time. We looked at these 2 drivers and we were thinking, when will we find value? And value itself really hasn't changed. In other words, quantum computing, we were talking about what kind of value it's going to create. We're going to put 3 categories: optimal, intractable, and de novo. Optimal means there's already something that we already are finding. For example, designing optimal logistic group. But then intractable, it's something that we still haven't seen yet, but we know there's probably like explosive use case. Now, de novo is something that it's really to the future. It's just still imaginary. But we wanted to make sure that everyone would keep track of what can happen in the de novo category as well. Of course, we haven't really been able to find all these materialize yet. So the value itself, I do believe we have the same idea even today. But then when will we see these value materialize? We do believe over the 3 years, things have accelerated, and we realize we have to sort of change our time frame. And we looked at the 5 key factors: hardware, software, the competition with the classical computer, and data loading. Data loading, I hope I'll be able to explain a little more later on. But when we're trying to use quantum computing, it really depends on how you're supposed to set it up. And there's a lot of superconductivity. There's a lot of a platform that you'd be looking into. And how would these develop depending on the time is something that we needed to look at. And so I'd like to go over one by one. So first of all, this is something that it compares what we assumed back in 2021 and what we think now. So for the hardware performance, like 3 years ago, we thought quantum volume would double every 1 or 2 years. That's what we thought. But on the right-hand side, I mean, that itself really hasn't changed in the end, but you can see the contents, the details have really changed. And I think that change was something that we observed for this 3 years. So the qubit itself increased, but fidelity hasn't exceeded 99.9% at best. And we're hearing something that would outperform, but we still are in this frame or area. And so quantum volume is pretty much as expected back in 20. I mean, the current assumption hasn't really changed that greatly from what we thought back in 2021. But then when it comes to software performance, when we think about what can be done in NISC, we thought that there's a lot of calculation that is going to be computing that's going to be required. But then when it comes to fidelity part, NISC device, we still haven't really seen software, at least from our perspective, we haven't really seen software that really be able to optimally use this quantum computing. And also, there's this competition with the classical computer, and there's a lot of things. For example, generative AI, and at the same time, there's intractable areas. For example, protein predicting, or those. We're seeing this, and so classical computers are doing pretty well, and so how can quantum computer really excel is something that we yet have to see. And so if the fidelity is also not really increasing, even if you're trying to use quantum computing to do the computer or the calculation, you might not really be able to get the expected performance depending on what data would be loaded. And so there's still the classical data loading that seems to be hindering the expectation. Now, this is something that metric info is giving. And so on the vertical axis, you're looking at the amount of qubit, and we're also seeing how much logical operation is going to be required on the horizontal axis. And so we're trying to look into algorithm. And so if you'd be able to look at top right, you're looking at some of the more areas where people would want to pursue. It's like 10 peta computing that's going to be required. And if the fidelity is like 99%, it's probably intolerable. And again, if we wanted to pursue with this current fidelity, maybe 1 million times may not really do. But maybe on the more left-hand side, you might be able to find some good field, which we still haven't really been able to identify what that could be. And this is like a timeline of really major, famous key algorithm. And on the right-hand side, when we try to keep track of what's developed from 2014, we didn't exactly find anything that would be worth putting on. And this, I'm sure this is self-explanatory already, but again, this is both from Google DeepMind. So for example, if it's protein fold, if we be able to look into, we thought quantum computing is really going to solve the genome calculation, but deep learning was able to overcome that even without having to use quantum computing. We thought that this was intractable area, which you absolutely need quantum computing, but at the moment, classical computer is well able to do it. And of course, that's probably good for the current humankind. But then people who's trying to really pursue what you'd be able to do with quantum computing, that's quite tricky. How are you supposed to really excel a classic computer? And then also, a lot of times we talk about this middle part. You'd be able to do this data loading, but then when it comes to so in the quantum information processing chain, you need to make sure that you be able to load this data in this algorithm. And if you think of it on a normal basis, you start from 0 and you're supposed to start this computing. But then again, you have to think about the fidelity in an initial stage. How you set this is going to really determine what accurate result you'll be able to obtain. And so if if you had to import something that would work well in the quantum computing, that would be good. But then at this moment, we still haven't really been able to find what could be imported. Out of 100, there's 30 that would still become a bottleneck. And so this is also an area where we do believe we have to work more on. So there's a lot of bottlenecks. And I did skip a lot of explanation, but towards the end, we look into 48-bit. We heard of this very good news about what could be done, but then compared to the 2021 forecast, what seems to be the roadmap today? And so what you find towards the top right, 450 billion to 850 billion. That's the value that is supposed to be created by quantum computing. That number really hasn't changed over the years, but then the procedure to get there has really changed. And so the area where we change from dark green line to light green line, but then it seems like what we expected NISQ would be able to do really hasn't been able to catch up with what we expected. But when it comes to error correction, we know that is making progress. And so the place where you find in lighter green, you can see that it sort of has stretched out to the more earlier days. So this is probably a better view of how this quantum computing technology would evolve. And there's some few more slides that I would like to go into. And so there's the background. So within the public sector, if you'd be able to look at the far right bar graph, who's going to be providing the money for this? So there's been a lot of investment to these technology. And actually, overall, it's gone down by like 50%. But then public sector and venture companies have really been able to make this investment to sort of sustain volume-wise. Now, when it comes to GPS or internet, and this was an area where public sector had been investing a lot even before we were finding a very good use case. But then for NISQ, there are a lot of areas where we still haven't really been able to see much investment as we expected. But in the more mid to long term, we do believe there's going to be a great appetite for making investment here. But who would be paying further attention to quantum computing? So again, this is the updated version of the forecast. And it's 4 that we've had and another new one. And first starts with the high-tech industry. We hope that high-tech companies would keep on accelerating the amount of interest they would have. And it's really like high-tech vendors. And then others would be like chemicals, agrochemical, pharmaceuticals, defense and space. And also finance sector would probably be very sensitive to what seems to work, what seems to be the center of attention in the end. And so I hope finance sector would also keep on paying attention to the further development of quantum computing. Now, what kind of competition do we expect to happen in the future, or what is going to be requested to the players in this space? So this is partly our assumption, but one, again, is really about fidelity, which I have been mentioning. So the number of quantum bit increasing, that itself is good, but then how much noise control or can you do is going to be the key. And also the clock or counting speed or data loading is something that we'd have to pay attention to. Connectivity, computer performance is also going to be the key factor that you need to look into. For example, the optic pin set. We know there was the demo of that, but how better connectivity you'll be able to find is also going to be the key. And what can you compute is also going to be a key. And so in the end, it's going to be ROI. People probably are going to look into ROI. Does it make sense to invest? Because maybe you might be able to materialize what you're looking for by using generative AI or AI. And we were saying like we were talking about like logical qubit, it increased to 48. I mean, we're hearing a lot of news around that, but it seems like in the end, people who would be deeply involved probably would be looking at how much return you'd be able to gain from making investment. But again, I know I still have some time left. But what I really wanted to say is we've just launched a report. There's going to be a Japanese version provided, and there's a QR code that's supposed to take you to the Japanese version of the report when we have it done. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I might be able to answer. Please. Am I supposed to pick who is supposed to ask questions? So thank you very much. If I can just confirm, I just wanted to confirm a more accurate number of what you presented. So within your 2021 report, you were saying that there's going to be $5 to $10 billion that would be seen from the users, and the providers would be like 1 or 2 billion. But then in the updated version, it's like 100 to 500 million to the end user, and to the providers, it's still the same, 1 to 2 billion. Is that the same? Yes. Do I have the right number? Yes, you do. Thank you very much. A lot of press people ask me that. I actually come from the press. I don't know if I can go back to my previous slide, but even without that, can I ask another question? Can you have another question? Thank you very much for the presentation. So was it 3, 4 years ago? I understand things have changed a lot. And with that, users who be using quantum computing probably would have to they would have to have themselves developed. But what kind of user? What is the profile of the user that we expect? Do you think that assumption has changed from the past versus what you see now? Yes, thank you very much. I think it was from last year. There was a report that we launched last year, and there we said what POC is being done, and who would be interested in paying more for this area. And I think that report is really going to be helpful to answer your question. But the breakdown again itself hasn't really changed. In other words, there's optimal, intractable, de novo, and the intractable part. In other words, people who will be paying attention to solving things that the current existing computers would not be able to. And we're looking into people who's a bit closer to that. And also, there has been a change to who has the appetite to make investment. And so pharmaceutical companies, we're seeing some pharmaceutical companies that's trying to accelerate the amount of investment, but then there are some people from business reasons have decided they want to wait a little more before they'd be able to invest in these new fields. Thank you very much.